Hi everyone and good evening. Welcome to this event about the new strategic approaches countering violent extremism with Lord Walney and Dr. MELANIE GARSON. I'm Sarah Greenbaum, the Deputy Executive Director at the Pinsker Centre. The Pinsker Centre is a think tank comprised of students and young professionals. We host events centering around international politics and affairs, specifically looking with emphasis at how they impact the Middle East, about British politics and about freedom of speech, to broaden the conversation around these important topics. To hear more about what we do, hear about future events and to engage with us directly, please like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Our social media handle is @Pinsker Centre. Recordings of our previous events and future ones, and hopefully this one, are or will be on YouTube. So please also check out our channel and subscribe to it. Our partners on tonight's event are the UCL Public Policy Faculty, UCL International Relations Society, Bristol Conservative Association, and the Roger Scruton Centre. Lord Walney is an independent advisor to the government on political violence and disruption. He was the chair of Labour Friends of Israel between 2011 and 2013, and a member of the Public Bill Committee for the Defence Reform Act of 2014. He was previously also the Member of Parliament for Barrow and Furness from 2010 to 2019, and has worked as Special Advisor to Prime Minister Gordon Brown. Dr. MELANIE GARSON, a great friend of ours at the Pinsker Centre, is a mediator, a lawyer, and a senior teaching fellow at UCL in international conflict resolution and international security. She teaches courses including international conflict resolution and post-war development, international negotiation, and the future of conflict in the digital age. She has previously worked as part of the International Disputes Group at Freshfields, Bruckhaus, Deringer, as Director of Development and New Programs for the Centre of Jewish Arabic Economic Development, and as Director of Communications for Peaceworks LLC. We really hope you enjoyed the discussion tonight, and if you do have a question, be that via Zoom or Facebook comment, when you submit, if you are a university student, please also make sure to include the name of the university that you attend. Without further ado, over to our panelists.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Good evening, Lord Walney, and welcome. Welcome to all our students from UCL and beyond, who are scattered all over the globe at the moment. And we're really looking forward to tonight's discussion. How it's going to work is I'm going to take the extraordinary pleasure of asking some of my questions to Lord Walney. And then if you, as Sarah mentioned, if you can put your questions into the Q&A section of the discussion box, I will then channel some of those questions towards Lord Walney. If there's a question that you've seen that's already been asked, give it a thumbs up if it's one that you really want to hear the answer to, and that will bring it straight to the top of the list. And we'll be able to make sure we answer as many of your questions as possible. So, Lord Walney.
John, please. I mean, I'm very new in the House of Lords and I'm never going to get used to the title.
You never even get to Lord. Are you sure? Well, then, sure. That would be my pleasure. And well, going to titles, as you brought it up, I want to start thinking about, so we're in this atmosphere, this really interesting ecosystem where extremism is seeing a huge shift in Britain as a whole. We've got more professionalized extremists, we've got intellectualized extremism, and we've got it operating locally, nationally and transnationally. And thrown into the heart of this is yourself with this really interesting title, which is of looking at political violence and disruption. And this seems to go into a whole wealth of terms that we're seeing at the moment in these government positions, sort of hateful extremism, violent extremism, with counter-terrorism. And I wonder if you could just start us off for a few minutes of just kind of unpacking this term of, it's a new term, it's an interesting term, and what that means for your remit.
Sure. Well, if we can talk about it over the next hour, then we may both be more enlightened by the end. But I was asked by the Prime Minister and Home Secretary to write a report for them on the particular issue of the where fringe groups are and fringe activists are in the aftermath of the pandemic, looking particularly at the way that far-right activists and groups have been seeking to exploit the conditions in which we found ourselves over the last 9 months, but also also looking at the relatively unexamined water, certainly in government terms, of the far left, and the potential for disruption, violence, antisocial behaviour in the future from particular far left groups and activists.
And that's super interesting, because I mean, one of the things when they released the statistics on Prevent recently was actually for the first time, the majority of referrals that were taken through to the channel were actually from far right groups, that for the first time, which is sort of one of the misunderstandings within that. So I have to ask this before I want to go into this. What made you want to take this position? What is it that interested you? I'm wondering now.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. The issue of extremism was something which was of growing interest to me through my time as a member of Parliament, and my hook into this world, I guess, was looking at the conflict in Syria, and the particular issue of Islamist fighters, British citizens, going over to fight jihad in Syria, on the issue of what would happen to them on their return, and where how it was that such a relatively, I mean, small numbers, but still in terms of what they were doing, relatively large groups of people, how were they being radicalized, and what was the government's answer to this issue? How do you, well, I mean, of which there are still some very open questions about who comes back, how do they come back, are they prosecuted, how are they prosecuted? And it was clear, the more you looked at this, that actually there were not enough people in Parliament, certainly, who were focusing on this area, and so it was something that that I took as a focus. I was lucky enough to be able to do a master's from King's while I was studying, and my dissertation was on the issue of how Daesh and its predecessors radicalized people. So just got into it from there, and as I was standing down from as a member of as an MP in the House of Commons almost exactly a year ago now, I was asked by Downing Street if I would take up the slightly different role of being the special envoy on countering violent extremism, and the idea then was to look more at the way that our allies dealt with issues like de-radicalization and Islamist violence. Now, the pandemic has well, sort of changed all of those plans, and as we were working out what the new path and what my new focus should be, there's this particular interest in looking at the far right and the far left, and what is happening domestically in the aftermath of the pandemic. I mean, I think it's important for everyone in positions like mine who are looking at the far left and the right, always to put this into the context that clearly the greatest threat, both in terms of nearly all of the numbers of violence, comes from Islamist terror and extremism. and that will remain so for some time. But you're absolutely right to pick out the way in which prevent referrals are changing, and clearly there has been a growing threat of the far right, and you've seen mechanisms like Prevent, you've seen institutions like the Metropolitan Police, who have the counter-terror lead in this country, taking the far right far more seriously, and so I guess developing or finding that their strategies, that the way in which they relate to other organizations, the way in which civil society organizations, schools, for whatever, understand that is often less well developed. And then you look at the issue of the far left and where this could potentially go, and I think you are seeing again that there has been, just comparatively, while the threat level is at this moment in time far less in terms of those pointers, you are seeing, I think you see again, even certainly compared to Islamist violence, but also to the far right, a less developed picture, which I think is going to be a really interesting thing to look at over the coming months.
Without a doubt. So linking into this, and I think Sarah Khan, who's been working on the sort of hateful extremism, I think one of the things that's sort of been generated from that discussion is the need to redefine what is extremism in order to have more effective policy, and to also be able to close some of the gaps on the legislation. What's your take on that, and how do you see in engaging with that?
Well, it's a really important question, and I've long been a supporter of the work that Sarah Khan has been doing. I was a member of the Home Affairs Committee for a number of years, and was looked at the work of the that her and her unit have been doing on that, and they have given a lot of thought to the issue of what is extremism, where should the boundaries be drawn. I've been appointed to this new role after much backwards and forwards over recent months behind the scenes, just last week, and I'm hoping very much to get together with Sarah Khan to talk about that very issue, because she has got and her group has got a lot of learning on this. My instinct is that there are particular areas where actually we just haven't really applied the lens of extremism, if that is the right lens to look at, or unacceptable behaviour, to significant areas that it is right now for us to take another look at, which is what I hope that I'm going to be able to be doing.
It's going to certainly be an interesting look into it, and of course I can understand obviously why your role has taken some redefinition with the pandemic and the push that everybody has gone online and working from home and being desocialized in some ways that has on a psychological effect is almost stopped some people's inhibition, or stopped the inhibitions of speech, and at the same time the constant engagement with trying to receive material online has led to widespread globally fears of the rise of extremism. It's seen as the second pandemic. Of course, it's right in the heart of some of the conversation we're hearing at the moment with the anti-vaccination arguments and how that sits in with it. But how then, so at the same time we have this online harms white paper, that so you're sitting sort of in between kind of all these spaces going on.
Getting on many toes, I'm sure.
Many, you're going to have to be juggling up a whole lot of balls there in the air. But thinking, so where are you situating? How much of your focus is going to be looking at that online harms, and what is your initial thinking of perhaps that white paper, the duty of care concept that they think should be put on the industry itself, on the tech companies, or do you think that's going to be sufficient, or will you be looking at rooting for something more?
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know, and I'm open-minded. I'm open-minded about this. I'm aware that there has been a lot of negotiation over recent months, years. Some of it on the surface, and probably some of it in the background between the major social media companies and the government, and with varying degrees of success. It is going to be a fundamentally important issue, that interface between the companies for whom we rely to such a great extent to get so much of our information, what their attitude is to being able to where appropriate take things down. Whether I've been part of campaigns in the Home Affairs Committee, looking at the huge frustration sometimes of the slowness of government, of the social media companies to act, but more than that, in what I think we are probably at a I don't know if it's a crossroads, but an important moment in as not just the UK, but Western society, countries right across the world, as to what should that relationship be. I'm not sure whether the online harmed white paper is going to solve that question for us. I think there is a danger that we get into a sort of a fairly simplified debate about, I found this video on this site, Facebook, whatever, and they said they were going to take it down, and I found it, and therefore these people are bad, and what's more, I've found ways in which they are making money. Now, that is an important part of the picture. I don't mean to denigrate it, but it is a part of, I think, a much bigger and more difficult question of how we receive information as human beings, and what are the appropriate filters to put on that as a company that is currently making money in one way or another from that, but also as a government. And I think rightly in the spotlight is going to be the government's attitude towards the misinformation campaigns, which are undoubtedly cranking up over the vaccine. But I think there's probably a question of public policy and in terms of what is the right position for a liberal democratic government to take over information. And I think there is also probably questions over what is effective in terms of if your overall goal to talk about the issue of vaccination is to get as many people understanding what the real issues are and getting an accurate picture of where the of what the risk balance is, and make informed decisions on the basis of that, in which it is clear that the informed decision is to get the vaccine, then it's not necessarily the case that one approach, which is you will only hear the correct information, and we will do everything possible to stop all other kinds of information. That's not necessarily going to bring you the most effective outcome.
It's for those people who were in my class today on disinformation, this is at the heart of what we were talking about, sort of what would be, we were having our hypothetical discussion. If we were in your position, how would we be tackling it? And it's we didn't get to it at the end of an hour either. But
and to be clear, just to say, I mean, this is one of the issues that I'm really interested in looking at. I have not been integrated in this discussion from up until now, so I'm not talking at this moment as an insider, but as someone who's really interested in looking at the issues that the government's grappling with.
It's so don't worry, I have one of those knocking around here that's unfortunately is quiet. Please, at the moment.
Let's have the vaccine so we can actually go back to seeing each other in person and not having
having the dogs. One day we hope
that my 6-month-old may wake up within the next 35 minutes, but fingers crossed on that one.
We'll try and get it in the window. But I think that's so thinking of that, and the other big, because I want to come back to this question of Islamic fundamentalism, and particularly some of the politics we're looking at. But I guess the other big spanner in the works with looking at this is how have you been thinking about, or how are you involved in thinking about how Brexit's going to impact how we tackle sort of dealing with extremism in the UK? I know there's some worry on thinking about having less access or having to renegotiate access to things like the Europol database and some of those information sharing databases, which is causing some concern within the security community of being able to manage extremism. What's your thinking on that at the moment?
Well, I mean, of course, that has long been a concern, and successive Home Secretaries set out with a series of goals for which, like, the ultimate aim was complete integration, and we're not going to be there next month. My hope is that just the basic common sense and logic is going to prevail. I mean, and please goodness, let this to be sooner rather than later, that it is in everybody's interests, except the bad guys, for there to be at least as full a level of sharing, of data sharing, information sharing, system sharing that there is now in after the Brexit transition. And so it's it's regrettable that we've not been able to get to that point yet, but it just I think emphasizes the importance of all sides on this, looking at being really focused on what the outcome that we all share, and getting back to full integration as quickly as possible.
I hope so. And so keeping our eye on Europe for a moment, but also thinking of how it's also been, if you want, the universal plague of de-radicalization programs is the high level of recidivism, particularly when we're thinking about fighters coming back, and particularly de-radicalization programs in prisons, and sort of largely being 95%, I think, is some of the statistic is ineffective. This is really in the heart of some of the work that you were doing in your academic work, what is your view, or in your approach, how would you want to face tackling this kind of recidivism when it comes to extremism?
It's a great question. It's not going to be the area that I'm going to be reporting on, which gives me more license there, just to, I guess to chew the fat with you. That I think there will always be a problem at the heart of this approach, that an offender is de-radicalized, there will always be an element that a defender is de-radicalized up until the point in which they commit another heinous act, and then it's clear that things were never as they seem. And so it is very hard when effectively there is close to often a binary equation here, and you can never look into with complete confidence look into people's minds. There's always going to be an element of concern and risk about this. Look again with the proviso that I've been looking at this from the outside. As an outsider, it has been something of significant concern that the reports that you have of imams within the prison system, sometimes feeling that they don't have the ability or the levels of respect to actually take on those within the prison system who are radicalizing other people. And I know that's an issue that others within government are looking at, and I would hope that it's an issue that it's going to be taken really seriously. I think probably over the years, I mean, there are people within the system now who swear that this is not the case anymore. If I were looking at this in detail, I would want to test this out. But I certainly think in the past there has been there's been a reticence to really get into the issues of religious-based violence, and there's been a desire from civic liberal society to want to say that this has that the issues of radicalization have nothing to do with faith, where actually if you are an Islamist who is intent on actually radicalizing sometimes vulnerable people around you, then you are absolutely using faith as the tool to do that. And so I think those in government who are re-examining that issue and what the role of the state is in being able to effectively counter the profoundly religious Islamist narrative is hugely important. I mean, let's look at what is happening over in France at the moment with President Macron and the French state being prepared to be much more open than other countries are in citing Islamism as clearly a problem. And if there is a confusion in some people's mind between the noble face of Islam and Islamism, then explaining that and making sure that problem is explained. And we have not been, I think, in recent years been as proactive in doing that. And so I think we should be, you know, first of all, being full square in our support for the efforts of President Macron to cite the Islamism as a problem, but also seeking to understand and learn from the issues and the difficulties that France is going through at the moment.
Actually, you preempted me because I was going to ask you about how you felt sort of Macron's policies fit into this picture. And of course, it's a lot of the reaction to that. So he's moving on one side and advocating strengthening moderate voices with community-based approaches, which is also something that's been said is somewhat lacking in some of the UK approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has been it's been a profound mistake, actually, in the last, well, I don't know, let's say over a decade, in that too many people have left the pitch open to Islamist narratives, which say that any Muslim who maintain any kind of constructive relationship with with public sector, with British government institution, is therefore part of the problem. I mean, that is a straight up Islamist narrative, and I think at a government level, we have not done enough over the years. And frankly, there are some of my colleagues who should be ashamed of themselves for the way in which that they have allowed that kind of narrative. They have not challenged that kind of narrative over the years, to the point where the Prevent programme has been very significantly controversialized in ways beyond the question of what reforms it should be. We have allowed trust in that basic mechanism of, you know, saying to saying to people, look, if you are concerned about radicalization of people in your community, you've got something you can do about it, and we can help you. And we've allowed that to become, we've allowed others to controversialize that, I think in a way that's, well, we're now hopefully going to be trying to get some of this ground back, but we made things far more difficult. I should say that I mean, there have, when talking about supporting President Macron and what France is trying to do to this, I mean, I think we shouldn't allow that to be I won't allow anyone to suggest that that is blanket support for everything, every measure the French have taken. I mean, and there is that, I think there have been some issues in French culture for which, you know, we should be hopefully isolated incidents. I don't know, I'm not an expert, but you can get the sense of isolated incidents of what comes to mind is who was the which was the French mayor of which town or city that tried to ban modest swimsuits, for example. I mean, I don't think that kind of illiberalism, illiberal liberalism, shouldn't be in any part, is not part of any kind of answer to anything. And that is, as I see it, that is not what the French approach is now. But we shouldn't allow the opponents of those who want to take radicalization and the threat of terror out of communities to try and suggest that that is what people like me are supporting.
And no, that's always been one of the tension with the French laïcité concept and the sort of extreme liberalism that leads to these liberal ideals. And that brings me right into the heart of, and I know we're going to move some questions, and this will probably address some of them, is this question of course, you're going to have to navigate the tricky issue of where it sits with free speech. I know that part of Sarkar there has been discussion about labeling sort of conspiracy theories and having some sort of ranking system, a tier system, as to where conspiracy theories begin to move into extremism, and where does that line sit with free speech. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear what so I was thinking on this, because it's not a clear-cut issue for me, and I don't imagine it is for anyone. Of course, we don't have the same, we don't have the written constitution with its with the right to freedom of speech that America has. So our approaches have always been able to be somewhat different than in the States, and we have, I think, probably largely benefited from that. But I think, one of the things that interests me is in the way that I was sort of suggesting on narratives around the vaccine, is that there was one question of, what is right in terms of drawing out what an individual's legal privilege, rights, protections ought to be in the debate on the freedom of speech and the freedom to and does that and where is the line between that and the harm that it can do. And another question is, okay, aside from what ought the legal position to be, what is actually effective in stopping that? And they're not always necessarily drawn in exactly the same place.
And that leads me straight into one of our first questions, which comes from Peter Durham, which, of course, the free speech debate is in no place more than it's debated those on the campuses, and where this tension between free exchange of ideas or exploring ideas and the line between hate speech and extremism. And I know it's something that part of the Prevent program in trying to stop speakers coming to campus has sort of hit some sticky points. Where do you see from the investigation you're going to be doing sort of the free speech on campus issue sitting? Well,
it's one of the things I'm interested in, and I'm interested in it in both in terms of my innate sympathy for JSOCs around the country seeking to keep a level of protection, security, and just basic feeling of safety that can be compromised from allowing particular individuals onto campus in the name of freedom of speech. And there are few things I think you can find more irritating than some of the characters around the freedom of speech debate, who simply are doing it to carry on their they're now into their 40s and 50s. I do have particular individuals in mind, but I'm not going to name them, who are basically wanting to carry on in the life of the controversialist president of the debating society that maybe they were, or maybe they got beaten by their friend to be sort of 30 years ago, and are now just sort of wanting to kind of drum up this sense of controversy, when actually it's people's lives that are affected by this. And so, you know, from my time in the student movement, my instinct has been that there is not your legal freedom to say something is not the same as, you know, necessarily having having the freedom to walk into any place that you wish and say it. And it does not, and too many people, I think, over the years have mistake, either sort of willfully or often sort of misguidedly, and wanted to sort of do the right thing, think that they've got to open the doors to some pretty hateful people. And if someone, if a you know, a far-right organisation, where the person with clear far-right sympathies rocks up and says, oh, you've got these sensible people on this debate, this is denying my freedom of speech, unless you give me a spot on that platform. I mean, complete nonsense. People have the venues absolutely have the right to choose in general who they want to address them at particular times. If they don't want to extend an invitation to a particular person, well, fine. However, you know, I think that there is also a danger in higher education institutions that there are topics, valid topics for discussion, which are or certainly could become completely off limits in a way which is potentially threatening the livelihoods of reasonable people who are trying to grapple with difficult debates on difficult issues in real time, and it's not. I don't think it's in our interest to simply to move ever closer to a culture where unless you say a particular form of words in at a particular time, then you are valid to be to lose your job or and well, to be denigrated and ultimately quite often in short order to lose your job.
It's certainly a tension, and speaking on the lecturer side, I mean, and that's been a tension that sort of dealing with difficult topics and sensitive topics, and even more so when we're delivering recorded content, which just adds another level of attribution, is an extraordinary difficult balance, particularly when you're teaching politics. So there's no easy answer there. I want to move to a really interesting question here that's come in from Charlotte from Queen's University in Belfast. That says, how do you see Brexit affecting violent extremism in Northern Ireland?
I don't know. Is the honest answer to this? I've been I'm alive. I was alive to the debates which were happening at the time of Brexit and the decisions which were taken by particular prime ministers for particular kinds of deal. I mean, and so forgive me for not going into a great level of detail on this. I will say that I think there is an ongoing responsibility for all lawmakers, as government ministers, but also, you know, all of us in both houses, to understand the potential implications for the decisions that we're making on trade deals, trade arrangements, Brexit negotiations, on communities in Northern Ireland, and on the Good Friday Agreement. We cannot get to a place. I don't think anyone is suggesting I don't think anyone is advocating this, but we cannot allow us to get to a place where actually we are undoing the very well, it sounds like your questioner understands this far more than I ever will. Very hard won gains and often, you know, fragile progress which has been made in our lifetime in the last couple of decades.
Absolutely. I mean, the eyes will be on Northern Ireland, but as you say, hopefully the gains that have been made and the relative stability that's been achieved has given people an interest in committing to it, which is, I think, part of many of the programs that deal with violent extremism, is to create that ongoing commitment and interest to the stability, rather that's more attractive than the alternative. Which we're thinking about these sorts of fringe groups or groups that gain traction either on the extreme left or extreme right. I've got a question from Jonathan Hunter here, which is when groups such as the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, which is one which Jeremy Corbyn is a patron of, and given that David Cameron sort of raised concerns about people who apologize for Palestinian terrorism as part of extremism, and that the Manchester bombers, one of them was associated with rallies or to the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. What are your thoughts on anti-Semitism and extremism arising from groups like these, and where do you find the balance in dealing with that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Jonathan, and I think it's one of the things that I'm interested in looking at, that the way in which some pretty vile ideas and attitudes towards other human beings have been effectively given a free pass over the years because they have come from the left. You know, not my, and I say the left in inverted commas, not my tradition within the left, but particular parts of left-wing thought in Britain, and that there has been a kind of the idea of you being left-wing has in some people's minds given a sort of automatic wash to anything that you come out with, and some of the ideas that you have alluded to are truly vile, and the fact that we've had, the PSC being welcomed into parts of some, by no means all, some parts of the Labour movement, the wider group around the Labour Party, with correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that their banner, their logo is still a Palestine, a map of Palestine which completely eradicates Israel from the map, is totally unacceptable. And I'm really glad to see some of the progress which is being made by the Labour Party in recent months. My old party, I was started delivering leaflets for the Labour Party when I was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old. But it is not. But this is not over until it's over, and it isn't over until there is a complete acceptance up and down the party that those kind of views have no place in a moderate mainstream party. And if you hold those views, then there is no place for you within the Labour Party. And look, there's been some really good steps in that direction, but let's not imagine that we're there yet.
Which I think everything's a work in progress, to put it, but there seems to be some renewed commitment, and that is, I think that is a good question, is that when you're, and probably you as an independent reviewer of this, to question that the extent that you feel obligated to take that kind of holistic view and step back to say that our understanding of extremism isn't just coming from the civil society, or just sort of coming, or uncivil society, or the grassroots, but where does it sit, or where is it trickling down, and where is it feeding upwards, and how do you look into that loop? Will that be something that you'll be seeking to address?
Yeah, I am interested. I think if I understand what you're saying, well, it is an area that I'm interested in, and I think my my experience of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party does, in recent years, does show how views which are totally unacceptable can relatively quickly, within the right, within, you know, placed in particular ways, can change people's perceptions of those views can change very quickly, and so an understanding of how the extreme can get into the mainstream and influence mainstream thinking. I mean, my sense in, you know, when, you know, what limited look at the ways that this has happened in recent history, but then my own personal experience over recent years is that actually that the borders between extreme unacceptable thought that we can decide we'll want to keep extreme and unacceptable, and more mainstream views can be more porous than we might like to think it is, and so you know, what more can be done to keep those views on the fringes is one of the things I'm interested in looking at.
So I know we've only got a couple more minutes of your time, so I just want to sort of wrap up with, I guess, asking two questions, on this sort of linked questions, in really when you sort of thinking about what do you, for yourself, what are you prioritizing going into this position, and linked to that, coming out of this position, so fast forwarding to whenever this might be. It might be one of these Hotel California things that you never quite leave, but it might be but it's you know, they say that about the Middle East. Once you work in the Middle East, it's like Hotel California, you kind of never quite leave it. So this might be your Hotel California, but if it's not, where would you like to look back and say, this is what I achieved? What would you what would be the benchmarks that you would say, this is what I set out to do, and this is what I'm pleased to have achieved? Sure.
Well, what I'm trying to spend the next few weeks doing is immersing myself in the government system as it is, which is for someone who's been an opposition MP for nearly a decade, and a member of the Home Affairs Committee, trying to ask questions of various parts of government who have not always been the most forthcoming in the answers that they give. It's a real privilege to be able to get stuck into that. So, you know, understanding where the government system and its agencies sees this issue is my priority over the next few weeks. And then, you know, I hope that this is a defined piece of work. I was really pleased that that those who were shaping this work insisted that written into it was the output of a report which is pending the approval of the Prime Minister and Home Secretary for publication, to give recommendations for change on this, which is not always the case with these kind of with these kind of positions. It is very, in fact, more usual is that, hang around and give us some advice, and then, years later you're sort of still there being or not. So the idea is to do this over a period of, say, the idea is not more than 6 months, but we'll see, and then move on. And the government says, "Oh God, that's such a wonderful report. I couldn't realise how brilliant you were. Look at those recommendations. I can't imagine we didn't think of all those before. We're going to do them all right now." And and it's, I don't know, a place in the House of Lords. Oh no, not. So beyond that, I don't know, but it's a fascinating task to be given. Real privilege to be able to get into this area, and I'm really sort of looking forward to getting stuck in over the coming weeks and months. So
linked to that, and there are a few questions that I'm very sorry that we're not going to be able to get to, but and so I guess the final one would be then is, what do you think might be your biggest challenge to achieving to what you want to do in this work? We've got questions on the thing on the board here about Biden's presidency and influencing international terrorism and extremism, or whether it's the challenge of taking programs like Macron leading to hate crimes against the Muslim community that might feel disenfranchised. Sort of, what do you feel the obstacles might be for you being successful, and sort of how do you think you're going to tackle those?
It is, I suppose it's it is always a moving and to an extent subjective concept of what is fringe and what is acceptable and what isn't. And I think I want to be able to rise to the challenge of showing that actually a democratic liberal society like the United Kingdom must always prize people's right to protest, to think, to express themselves, and so being able to draw where the line should be, and how to police it and what to do about it is, of course, the huge challenge for those of you. I'm not yet putting myself in the category, but people who look at extremism professionally and work in this area. That's always the challenge, but it's what I think makes this area so interesting and important. And if I can make a contribution to strengthening that vibrancy, then I would be delighted, I guess.
Well, thank you. That's your dog calling time. And, but it really kind of echoes some of, I think it was, I was reading Jonathan Sacks's book on morality recently, sort of in his memory, and I think it just worthwhile sort of very much, it sort of, he echoes that. He says it's all about free individuals governing themselves for the sake of common good, and about free society as a moral project in which we all play our part, and recognizing that our destinies are interwoven. And I think it's very much seeing that that extremism and is part of our society, and it's impacting our society, and how do we sort of recognize sort of dealing with it so that our society can be healthy and vibrant, both physically, hopefully with a non-conspiratorial vaccine, and socially and economically, as we all move forward into what will be a very interesting 2021. John or Walney, thank you so much for your time. We'll be all watching with great interest now, not to put the pressure on at all, at the recommendations and how it goes forward. It'll be as interesting for us as I'm sure it will be for you. Thank you so much for giving of your time we know you're extraordinarily busy. Thank you for everybody who's joined us today from universities far and wide. Thank you for the Pinsker Center for always facilitating these incredible conversations. For those of you who have not linked up and joined, please take a look at their website. There's a whole host of great talks that have gone over the last few years. And I think this is certainly one of the last big talks of this year. So for those of you that might not join us until the new year, wishing everybody really a great holiday season in however you get to choose to celebrate it, and just good wishes for a strong and happy and healthy new year. Walney, thank you so much.
No, thank you, Melanie. It's a privilege to talk to you. I can speak to you.